And so my challenge is how to present that challenge where they all want to reach and grasp for that higher bar.
You said you used a series of questions for them to look at their own work. Can you give us an example of what some of those are?
Yeah. We usually start in the beginning class with, this is newspaper jargon, but the lead, what you know is the opening paragraph or sentence of a magazine or news story, which is often the most difficult to write because it's the highest form of critical thinking. How do I boil down to the essence of what this event, person, issue is about, and then how do I do it in a way that makes it interesting and compelling? So I must sift through all this material and just pick those few things.
4 or 5 words.
That make it work. That's the epitome of critical thinking. You know, I cannot just regurgitate. I must sift through and think and decide what is the most interesting and important fact or description, and what is the most compelling way to present it so that a stranger, someone I'll never meet, sees what I want them to see. So we focus on those first paragraphs. So in those early stories, I'll put up that lead, and I'll ask questions such as, first of all, I make them read it aloud. That's another lost art in high schools. Because when you read aloud, you hear how things sound and whether they make sense or not. So I'll have a stranger read another student's lead. I won't have that student read it. And the class will hear the illogical things about it, that the words don't make sense, that the idea is not clear. They won't recognize it at first. So I'll ask a question such as, what is the picture that's painted here? And someone will describe, and they'll describe something ludicrous because the words don't add up, they don't make sense. I'll ask, does this paragraph or sentence contain one clear idea? What is that idea? Could it be clearer? Is there evidence to support that idea later down in the story? So you see how one question builds atop another to lead them down the journey, down the path of learning critical thinking.
Okay. Journalism is a natural setting in which to use writing to teach critical thinking skills. How can faculty in other fields also use it as a tool?
Well, like your previous guest, I'm constantly collecting anecdotes and stories that I can use in class, and I've got a couple from science. The more professors I talk to across varied disciplines, the more I'm persuaded that this is a powerful thing that can be worked in any situation. For example, one of my best friends is an organic chemistry professor at the University of Wisconsin, a distinguished researcher and PhD. I know nothing about chemistry. But he requires in his survey courses that his students write at least one essay and one big concept. Because he says, if you cannot explain to me in simple language, in your own words, what's going on here, I am not convinced you understand it. That if you cannot explain to a stranger in layman's language what the principle of thermodynamics is, I don't believe you understand it. I don't care how you did on the test. And so if he can use it, if he holds that standard, which I think is a very high standard, anybody can do it. In addition, think about it. In every major field, occupation, whether it be academic or professional, the leaders in those fields all are great communicators. So Stony Brook, we're training our students to be the best. So physics, Stephen Hawking. History, Doris Gordon Goodman. David Card in sociology. These are academics, but they are able to explain their work in terms so simple yet compelling that a stranger, someone who knows nothing about their field, such as physics like me, can understand it. If our best do this, what excuse can there be for the rest of us not to do it? They've set the gold standard by which we all should follow.
I was educated in Ireland for my undergraduate degree. I'm from Ireland. And I had never seen a multiple choice exam until I took the GRE. In Ireland, every exam that I ever took was an essay-based exam. And I firmly believe I understand the material better because of that. Because I had to write my ideas out in a convincing way than any of the multiple choice questions could have done.
Before here, I used to teach at Emory, and we had this student exchange program with St. Andrews. And I used to terrorize the American students by having the European students, who are our guests and our visitors, talk about their final exams. And so I would have a Norwegian student who'd been at St. Andrews and say, yes, we have one test at the end of the semester, and I'd have to write off the top of my head 30 pages, explaining some major concept in history or physics or whatever. And you should have seen.
And a semester. I had one a year.
One a year. You should have seen the look on the faces of the American students. I loved it.
I actually think it's wrong. I think testing more frequently is right, but I do believe that writing it as opposed to multiple choice is a much better approach.
I can see in the sciences you have to acquire a great deal of knowledge before you can think intelligently about that. That makes
and have the vocabulary to
yes, and that makes complete sense. But I think that you're absolutely right. At the end of the day, I should be able to explain it to a stranger, because that means, that shows I do understand it, and then I can take the next step. I understand it so well, I understand where the weaknesses are, where the flaws are, where the thinking needs to go next. And that's where we want our students to be when they graduate.
So what impact has this had on your students?
A tremendous. I haven't been here very long, but at Emory my reputation was the best evaluations I would get would be, this is the single most challenging course I've ever had, whether college or high school, but I would take it again. To me, that's the sweet spot.
Sure.
That's where I want to be. I want my classes to be a transformative experience that set my students on the road to being critical thinkers. So whether, I don't care whether they become journalists. I care that they become ethical human beings, that they become critical thinkers, people who know how to work hard and work effectively. And if I can get them on that road, I send them off, I tip my hat to them, and I've had students who become journalists, lawyers, doctors at this point, but they'll write back to me and say, thank you for putting me on this road.
And they'll write back well.
They know they better.
They better. So what is the biggest challenge to taking this approach?
The biggest challenge is that it is very labor intensive, and any professor knows this. It's a huge challenge. You're inviting lots of work, and it's easy for me with only 18 students to say this. I recognize that. But at the same time, I know that there are others. My friend Professor Landis at University of Wisconsin has 300 to 700 students in his freshman survey class. That the best know that there is no escape, that we must do this for our country to remain strong, so that American Academy remains the world's leader, that we must do this. It's interesting, I just came back from taking 15 students on a study abroad in China, and my host university was Tsinghua, which is the MIT of China, and my students were mixing with their students. And I asked each one of the Chinese students, who are our guides and interpreters, who are very proud and very lucky to be at this university and recognize it, more so than our American students. And every one of them said if they had the opportunity, they would come to an American university tomorrow.